Dayanim, Rabbanim, Mr. Vagel, Mr. Rowe, community leaders, leaders of the King David School, ladies and gentlemen, the story is told of a British Airways flight from Ben Gurion Airport in Tel Aviv to London Heathrow. As the plane was flying over the channel, an announcement came from the pilot, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry to inform you that the whole of London is covered by a blanket of fog, and as a result we have no alternative but to fly on to Manchester. At that point, an air hostess noticed a chassid dipping his hand deep into his overnight bag, from which he retrieved a little black book. He opened it. He started to sway backwards and forwards in a state of religious fervor, and she thought to herself, he thinks that his prayers are going to lift the fog. 15 minutes later, the pilot came over and announced, ladies and gentlemen, I have good news. The fog has lifted. We're back on track to arrive as scheduled at London Heathrow. So the hostess came over to the chassid. She said to him, I owe you an apology. He said, what for? She said, you know those prayers of yours? He said, yeah. She said, well, you know, I didn't think you could do it. He said, and she said, but you did it. He said, no, I didn't. She said, I saw for myself. Don't be so modest. He said, no, I did nothing at all. She said, but I saw it. He said, let me explain what happened. You see, he said, those prayers of mine, they were not prayers of supplication. They were prayers of thanksgiving. You see, he said, I live in Manchester. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't live in Manchester. I don't come from Manchester, but I am Chief Rabbi of Manchester, and in this capacity, I'm delighted to be with you this evening. And for me, I'm Rabbi of the whole of the UK and the Commonwealth, and that means that Manchester, for me, please God, will be a second home. And I'm intending to come here often. I visited during the month of August to get to know most of the Rabbanim, and I arrived today and will be leaving late tomorrow night, and we're planning a Shabbat and a Shiur and other activities. Please God, you will see a lot of me here because I treasure and cherish this great community within Klal Yisrael. I'm proud of your achievements. You have the most outstanding spiritual leaders, our Beit Din here, our Rabbanim. The achievements of the Rep Council, together with the community, are legendary. I'm proud to be your spiritual head, and I look forward to engaging with you and leading you well into the future. Now, I was pleased to hear that there's some Irish people here, and I'm looking forward to seeing all of you afterwards, together with everybody else. And I recall an incident which happened when I was in Dublin. I got a call from the Prime Minister's office, the Taoiseach's office, to say that there were two visiting American congressmen. They had just been on a tour of European capitals. The day they were visiting Dublin was on Monday. On the day before, they had been in Munich, visiting various representatives there. And they asked me to meet them, and the reason was because they were Jewish. So I got together with them, had a lovely afternoon, and they told me that on the previous day, being in a German city, they decided to do what was right on a Sunday to do when you're in Germany, and that is to go to church. So they inquired about the leading Lutheran church. They notified the authorities they would be coming. They were greeted at the entrance. They were brought to be seated a banon, second pew from the front. It was quite a full church. The service was just about to start. They had no clue whatsoever about what was going on, so one whispered to the other, you know, in the pew in front of us, there's one solitary man. They said, let's watch him, and whatever he does, we'll do. So that's what they did. When he stood, they stood. When he sat, they sat. Towards the end of the service, he stood, they stood. And as soon as they stood, the whole church burst out in uncontrollable laughter. So it came to the end of the service. They were introduced to the pastor. He said, I hope you don't mind if I explain to you what happened at that point of the service. You see, he said, that was the announcements. I announced to the congregation that a baby boy had been born, and then I said, will the father please stand? So the congressmen said that from that experience they had learned a very valuable political lesson. And that is, you should always be aware of the facts before you make a stand. And that is a very Jewish lesson. Because we want our children to make a stand. To stand up and be proud about their values, about their past for the sake of their future. And in order that they should be in a position to do so, we have to provide them with the facts. And that is why this building exists. That is why you have great educational institutions here in Manchester to provide children, youth, and adults with the facts. You know, we're just about to celebrate the festival of Chanukah. Chanukah comes from the same root as chinuch, which is education, and Chanukah means dedication, indicating you can only have education with dedication. You can only succeed in chinuch if you apply yourself with absolute commitment, giving your all to establish schools, to run them successfully, as indeed we see right here in this building. And at the same time, you can only have dedication if you have education. Meaning, you can only be fully committed in a productive way if you know what you're talking about. If you're passionate about something and you don't have the facts at your fingertips, of what value is it? And we want Yidden around the world to be passionate about their Yiddishkeit. Therefore, we need to educate them adequately. And yes, education is a key feature of my Chief Rabbinate, and I'm so proud of the accomplishments with regard to chinuch here in this great Jewish center. A week ago I was in Berlin addressing the Conference of European Rabbis, the largest gathering of rabbis in Berlin since the Second World War. We came to Berlin to mark the 75th anniversary of Kristallnacht. And while there, this was my third visit to Berlin, while there, obviously I was thinking about what had happened on those very streets just before the war and during the war, how our people had suffered, and I was reminded of a midrash in the Yalkut Shimoni. It's a remarkable midrash, it's a simple story. There Chazal tell us as follows. There was a father who was on a journey with his young son. And they were going along, and the father was telling the boy about their destination, the city they were going to come to. And then at a certain point, the lad turned to his dad and he said, Abba, heichan hi hamadina? Father, where is the city you're talking about? I suppose our children would say, are we there yet? And then the father turned to his son and he said, Beni teidalach, my son, I am going to give you a sign. A sign so that you'll know when we're approaching. Keivan shetire et beit hakvarot, hamadina krovalach. When you see the cemetery, you will know that you're just about to arrive at the city. And we know cemeteries are positioned just outside towns and cities. So when you come to the cemetery, you'll know that you're nearly there. That's the sign. But notice the terminology in this Yalkut, written some 1,800 years ago. The boy did not say to his father, Heichan ha'ir, where is the city? Ha'ayara, where is our destination? Haya'at, hamakom. He said, Heichan hi hamadina. And for us, Medina means only one thing, Medinat Yisrael. And here our rabbis were telling us about the journey of the Jewish nation since the destruction of the temple in the year 70. We have been on a journey with our Father in heaven. And time again we've turned heavenwards and we've said, God, where is our own country? When will you return us to Zion? When will we reach that destination? When will we have an end to the misery of exile? And now with hindsight we know that God gave us a sign. When we came to the cemeteries, Auschwitz, Buchenwald, Belsen, Dachau, we were nearly there. And it was a direct consequence of the Shoah that we reached our goal, Medinat Yisrael. I'm not suggesting that that's why the Shoah happened. We as mere human beings will never be able to successfully grapple with this issue and understand why HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought about the Shoah. But one thing is for sure, a consequence of the Shoah was Medinat Yisrael, and how privileged and honored and blessed we are today to have the state of Israel. And as an ardent, lifelong Zionist, I'm proud of the Zionistic fervor of the Jewish community of Manchester, and the extent to which you support Israel and will always support Israel. And that provides you with a very close connection with the heart of Am Yisrael today. And then I was reflecting on what we had endured through those dark days of the Shoah. You know, the human eye is quite uncanny. The human eye can adapt very easily to darkness, but not to light. So, for example, it's Friday night, and suddenly the time switch goes and you're plunged into darkness. After 5 minutes, definitely 10 minutes, you can start to see. After 15 minutes, you can walk around. But let's say you're in a dark dungeon, and suddenly you're brought out into the light of day, you will probably go blind in an instant. And isn't that what has happened to us? Through the darkness of our suffering, somehow with uncanny resolve, we've been able to grapple with our difficulty, just like Jacob, as we have just read, who fought with the guardian angel of Esau through the darkness of night and emerged at morning time, limping but still intact. So too at the end of the Shoah, we are limping and the wounds will always be with us. But Baruch Hashem, we're intact. We were able to somehow manage to preserve our faith in the midst of that darkness. But today we have a bigger challenge. And our bigger challenge is, how are we coping with the light? With the privilege of freedom wherever we are in Europe. With the opportunities that Jewish people have today. To what degree are we using our freedom to be responsible Jews? There's a very simple children's story. You all know it. It's a story about the wind and the sun. They were having an argument. Which one of us is more powerful? They looked down on earth. They saw a farmer. He was out in his field. He was wearing a jacket. So they agreed, no, let's see who'll be able to force the farmer to take off his jacket. So the wind went first. The wind blew a bit. He held onto his jacket. Gale force wind. Oh, he held onto his jacket. A hurricane. Boy, he held onto his jacket for all he had. Then it was the turn of the sun. The sun turned up the heat just 3-4 degrees. He took his jacket off. Isn't that what has happened during the past century? Do you know that the Hebrew word shoah is a prophetic word for a hurricane, for a fierce wind? In the midst of our awful and dreadful shoah, Am Yisrael kept the mantle of our faith upon our shoulders. But what have we done since the war? How are we coping with sunlight? The biggest danger to us is assimilation. That with our freedom, instead of merely just integrating, we will assimilate into our host society. And the precious faith that we have received as a legacy from centuries before could chas v'shalom end while in our hands. And so this evening, I pose 2 questions. What should our mindset be? And secondly, what should our strategies be now in the second decade of the 21st century, whereby we should utilize the light that we have to responsibly use our freedom for a positive and productive Jewish future? So first of all, mindset. I want to tell you a bit about a town in which I grew up. From the age of 5 to 11, I lived in a town called Benoni. You've probably never heard of it before. It's 20 miles outside of Johannesburg. I'm the youngest of 4 children. My father was a very successful engineer, but actually he had always wanted to be a rabbi. And when I was 5 years old, he took a dramatic decision, a change of career path. He decided to become a rabbi. And his very first rabbinic position was in this town called Benoni. So we moved to Benoni. Benoni is famous in South Africa because the ERPM mines, the East Rand Premier Mines, which is the world's largest gold mine, is just outside Benoni. And that's why there's always been a strong Jewish community there. So we came to Benoni, and when I was at school, I was taught the origin of the town's name. The religious Afrikaner teachers told us that Benoni is a term that comes from the book of Genesis, and it means son of my sorrow. And this we read about on Shabbat in Parshat Vayishlach. It's the story of Benoni, a man by the name of Benoni. You know him by a different name. Rachel was pregnant. The time for birth came. She had already delivered a child, Joseph, for her husband Jacob. Now she was to deliver the last of the tribes of Israel. She had a very difficult labor to the extent that she was dying from childbirth. The baby came. The midwife said to her, "It is a boy." And then she said, "I hereby declare his name will be Benoni, Benoni, son of my sorrow." And then she died. This was her dying wish. And then the Torah tells us, Jacob changed his name to Benjamin, Binyamin, meaning son of my right hand, son of my strength. And Benjamin to this day continues to be in the top 10 of Jewish boys' names, as it has always been through the ages. But the original Benjamin started out as being Benoni. Now, how could Jacob have done that? This was his beloved wife. There is a Talmudic principle of Hodad Shchiv Mirah. We always respect, where possible, the dying wish of a person. And also the tradition there was, as you can see from the other children of Jacob, the mothers gave the name, not the fathers. So this was her dying wish. How could he have gone against it? So there are some who suggest that Ben Oni, Kochi Bereshit Oni, the term Oni can also mean my might, my power. So it's similar to Binyamin. Well, if that's the case, why change it? There are those who suggest that Ben-Oni is actually an Aramaic name, and while she was in the midst of her suffering, Rachel went back to her original vernacular of Aramaic, and therefore she gave a name in Aramaic. Jacob was insistent in the same way as he said Galeed instead of Yahagar Sa'aduta, so too he gave a Hebrew name to his son instead of an Aramaic name. But I'd like to suggest something different, which is as follows. Jacob didn't want his child to grow up always to be immersed in the sorrow of his birth, a product of sadness and tragedy. For him to grow up with the name Ben-Oni, son of sorrow, means that his whole life would be affected and shaped by tragedy and sadness. Jacob wanted to give his son a positive outlook for the future. He didn't want him to forget what had happened, to reject what had happened, to disregard what had happened, but rather, as a result of what had happened, he wanted him to be a strong character for the future. That's why he changed his name to become Binyamin, son of strength. And he took a leaf out of the book of Adam and Eve, the first people on earth. You know, they had two sons, Cain and Abel. One was murdered. The other was a failure of the human being. He was a murderer. So after that incident happened, how did they, the first two parents on earth, respond to that tragedy? What did they say? The answer is they said nothing. But we know what they did. They immediately went about having another child. They went about a positive deed for the sake of a good future for mankind. And isn't that what happened in the aftermath of the Shoah? There were no guidelines, no textbook given to survivors, how to cope, how to behave wherever you might be around the Jewish globe. But as a rule, there were some exceptions. As a rule, survivors did the following. Like Adam and Eve, they were stum. They didn't talk. But they did something. They set about establishing new families, providing a positive outlook for the sake of our collective Jewish future. They didn't want Benonis for children. They wanted Benjamins. It wasn't out of disregard or disrespect for what had happened to themselves personally and their families in the chambers. Rather, they were positively minded for the sake of a glorious Jewish future. And so we've seen it's only been during the last 10 to 20 years that some survivors have started to open up for the first time, to the amazement of their children and grandchildren who've heard stories and details about what they went through for the very first time. There are some who even give testimony, eyewitness accounts on videos without even telling their families, because they were so determined to build a positive and a bright future. So therefore, in terms of mindset, we need to be positively minded, not to dwell on the darkness of the difficulties of the past. We're not disrespecting the past. Our finest respect for our sad past will be to carve out a destiny of happiness and of success for Am Yisrael in the future. And our second response must be a strategic response. And I'd like to suggest to you 5 different strategies. And they're based also on the book of Genesis, which we're currently reading. Jacob was just about to pass away. His son Joseph came and presented his children Ephraim and Manasseh to him. And thank you, Diane Steiner, for your very kind words of introduction relating to my original namesake. So Jacob wanted to bless these boys, the first 2 Hebrew children to grow up in the diaspora. And they were part of the only mishpacha of ours in the diaspora. What words could he give them and through them to future generations to inspire them to be true to their heritage and to their faith? And he said these words while blessing them. 2 particular words. V'yitgu larov. May they multiply like fish. That was the bracha he gave to them. The guardian angel has blessed me and my forefathers. May stand by these children. V'yitgu larov. May they multiply like fish in the midst of the earth. How do we understand this bracha? Jacob was saying, if you can enable the Jewish people to multiply like fish, you've got the key to a successful Jewish future. So I will share with you 5 different commentaries on these 2 words, V'yitgu larov, and each one will present for us a strategy for strong Jewish success in the future. Number 1, the first parish we'll always go to, is of course Rashi. Rashi says, Jacob blessed his grandchildren to be like fish because they are protected me'ein bisha from ayin hara, because fish are underwater. Effectively, Rashi is telling us that there is siyata dishmaya for fish, God's protection. Because even though human beings continue to fish for fish, and there is a danger that their stock will be depleted, God protects the fish so that the schools of fish always remain in the waters of the sea. So therefore, Jacob's blessing was, may God protect you. You can adopt all the strategies you want to in the world, but you need siyata dishmaya. That's the first stop. Let's pray that God should help us. But we need to do more than pray. So we come to strategy number 2. It's a midrash. Midrash relates to the laws of kashrut, and it tells us that there's a difference between fish and animals. If you have an animal that is kosher, it might become treif. So for example, a cow, you could shecht it. However, afterwards you'll check the inside, and if you find that the lungs are punctured, then it's not considered to be kosher anymore. Can't even be delivered to a kosher butchery. With fish, however, there is no particular Jewish way of taking the life of a fish. It makes no difference how it dies, as long as it's dead. So a kosher fish will always be kosher. Of course, a kosher fish can become treif if you prepare it in a treif kitchen. We're not talking about that right now. But as opposed to animals, once a fish is kosher, it's always kosher. Says the Midrash. Jacob was saying to his children and all subsequent generations, just like a kosher fish is forever kosher, Yisrael shechatahu Yisrael. Similarly, Jewish people are always Jewish. We should always love every single Jewish person. Every Jewish person should be precious in our eyes. And Jacob was telling us that Ahavat Yisrael, unadulterated, wholehearted love of our fellow Jews, is a key component of Jewish continuity and Jewish survival. In our Haggadah of Pesach on Seder night, We talk about the Torah being given to 4 different types of children. Echad chacham, ve'echad rasha, ve'echad tam, ve'echad she'no yodeh lishol. One who is wise, one who is wicked, one who is simple, and one who doesn't even know how to ask. Why all the ones? Echad this, echad that. We should just be told, chacham rasha tam, ve'she'no yodeh lishol. 4 children, and these are there. Why echad this, one that? And the answer must be echad chacham. The wise child, the learned child, the good child, the righteous child. He is equal to echad, to one in our eyes. The rasha, the child who lets us down, the child concerning whom we tear our hair out of our heads, the one about whom we're so concerned, the rebellious child, echad rasha, he too is equal to one. He is precious in our eyes. He must be an important part of our community. God forbid that we should alienate him or her. But we should reach out to them to show them that they are precious in our midst. Echad tam. And the simple child who can't grapple with anything that is sophisticated, everything's at a simple level. Echad tam. That child too is equal to echad. V'she'no yodeh lishol. And the child who has enormous learning difficulties and challenges, similarly as echad is one in our eyes, is very precious. Every single Jewish person is of importance to us, as a result of which we must strive continuously to have Jewish unity. One of my favorite ideas relates to the origin of the Hebrew word for hand. Hand is yad. So why is hand called a yad? This is not a nice little idea, it's the actual reason. You see, in each finger you've got 3 joints, in the thumb you've got 2 joints, that adds to 14. 14 in Hebrew letters is yud daled, which is yad. That's why a hand is called a yad. Now, when 2 yidden come together and they shake hands, you've got yad and yad, which is yud daled, and that spells the Hebrew word yedid, which means a friend. And yedid is 14 and 14, which equals 28, spelling kaf chet, which is koach, which means strength. The greatest source of koach, of strength for the Jewish people is yedidut. It is friendship, it is togetherness, it is unity. If we are divided, if we are splintered, regardless of our numbers, we are weak. But even though we might be small in numbers, if we are united, we will always have incredible koach. And so we need to reach out to others. Not only concentrate on our own needs and what we're here for personally and individually, but rather to be there for one and all. There's a beautiful idea from the laning which we will have this coming Shabbat. You know, it's a Seder which is all about dreams. At the beginning, Joseph dreams 2 dreams. At the end of the Seder, he interprets the dreams of 2 others, Pharaoh's butler and his baker. Now, between the first 2 dreams at the beginning of the Seder, the last 2 dreams at the end of the Seder, there's a whole story. At the beginning of the Seder, Joseph is in his prime. He's the favorite son of his father. He wears his coat of stripes. Everything's going brilliantly for him. At the end of the Seder, he's at the lowest ebb. He's in a dungeon in Egypt. He's forgotten about. So what happened in between? The powerful message is as follows. At the beginning of the Seder, Joseph dreams about himself, his own aspirations, his own desires for the future. At the end of the Seder, he's interpreting the dreams of others. He's helping them to achieve their aspirations. When your dreams are only for yourself, you're on the way down. When your aim is to enable others to achieve their dreams, you're on the way up. And so it is with the mission of our lives. If we are here on earth only to serve our own needs and only to serve the needs of our own exclusivist community, we're on the way down. But if we're here for others, if we see our mission in this world to enhance our environment, to touch the hearts and mold the minds of other people, to ensure that through us being in this world, this will be a better place, the result is Hashem will always help us to go higher and higher. Siyata Dishmaya will come our way if we're here for the sake of other people. And that will only happen if we appreciate the value of every other person. Just like fish. Once it's kosher, it's always kosher. And so too with Jewish people. Every single one must always be precious and valued in our eyes. Perush, commentary, number 3, also comes from the laws of kashrut. Now there's a difference between the kashrut of animals on the one hand and fish on the other. They both have 2 signs. With regard to animals, one sign is external, the other is internal. The external sign is cloven hooves. The internal sign is chewing the cud. With regard to fish, both of the signs are external, fins and scales, says the Midrash. A fish wears its identity on its sleeve. It's not shy about anything, doesn't cover anything up. With regard to animals, their kosher status, partially covered and partially revealed. Therefore, says the Midrash, Yaakov was saying to his grandchildren, through them to subsequent generations, V'yidgu larov, be like fish. Openly declare your Jewishness. Be proud of your Yiddishkeit. And only if you have Jewish pride, you have a chance to succeed in the future as Jews. You know, the archetypal biblical character of Jewish pride was the prophet Jonah. Fleeing from a mission of God, he was on that boat. And then the sailors cast lots. They wanted to determine why that horrific storm was threatening them. The lots fell on Jonah. They realized he was the cause of it. They came to him and they wanted to find out, who is this strange person in our midst? And they posed 4 questions to him. And the 4 questions were, where are you coming from? Where are you going to? What is your occupation? And what nation are you a part of? And Jonah answered with 2 words, Ivri Anochi, I'm Jewish. If you want to know where I'm coming from, where I'm going to, what I do in life, what I'm part of, my entire existence is encapsulated in the fact that I am Jewish. And even though my life might be on the line right now, I'm Jewish and I'm proud of it. You know, there's a Gemara in Masechet Sukkah, Daf Lamed Hey, which discusses an ancient custom in the city of Jerusalem. The inhabitants of Jerusalem traditionally have always adopted added stringencies, as you will find if you're there for a Shabbos. The siren goes early, there's added time to Shabbos in Yerushalayim. And during the festival of Sukkot in ancient times, the inhabitants of Jerusalem would go around throughout the festival carrying their lulav, the palm branch. Wherever one went, lulava b'yado, his lulav was in his hand. So the question asked by some of our Mefarshim is, why only during Sukkot did a Jerusalem citizen walk around with his lulav in his hand? Why during Purim didn't they go with a Megillah in their hand? During Pesach with a matzah box in their hand? During Rosh Hashanah with a shofar in their hand? And the answer given is matzah and a shofar and Megillah, you can tuck it into a big pocket. A lulav you can't hide. A lulav which looks like the backbone of a person, which is a symbol of pride, of our erect pride in our traditions. That's something which cannot be hidden. And therefore, it's something to go around with. And even though it might seem very strange that we have these 4 kinds on the festival of Sukkot, that's how we do it. And in fact, the prime mitzvah of Sukkot, sitting in a sukkah, is certainly the key mitzvah which you can only perform if it is visible from the outside. If a sukkah is not visible, then it won't be kosher. Sukkot, therefore, is a symbol of Jewish pride. And so too it should be with all our ways of life. To be proud of our tradition, to be proud of our heritage. And when children see that their parents take pride in their Jewishness, in their community, in their values, in our state of Israel, it will rub off successfully on them. But if we start to feel uncomfortable, to feel shy about what we're all about, that too, God forbid, will rub off on our children. 4th strategy is called enthusiasm. So this is how another midrash goes. It's a rainy day, and you're looking at the waters of a river, and suddenly you'll see the head of a fish bobbing up out of the waters of a river, and the fish opens its mouth to take in some fresh drops of water from the skies. Says the Midrash, isn't this remarkable? The fish is already inside water. It's its natural habitat. It's got water wherever it wants to go. But now that there is some fresh water coming from the sky, it pokes its head out into the open as if it has never seen water before. Says the Midrash, so too with mitzvot. Yaakov was saying to us for all time, V'yitgu larav, it's only if you will be like that fish on a rainy day that you'll be able to multiply in your numbers, because you'll be enthusiastic for mitzvot. Because Torah is water. It's the very spiritual nourishment that keeps us going. And if Torah becomes stale, if the performance of mitzvot is something which simply doesn't excite us, there is a danger that chas v'shalom, we will stop performing. Now we're all familiar with the term Shomer Shabbat. What does it mean to be Shomer Shabbos? Isn't it an obvious matter? Well, it's not so obvious. The pasuk says, "V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et Shabbat, la'asot et Shabbat l'Torah." And the children of Israel will be Shomer Shabbat, la'asot et Shabbat, to perform Shabbos, to do Shabbos. So la'asot, to be an oseh Shabbos, means to keep the mitzvahs of Shabbos. So what then does it mean to be Shomer Shabbat, v'shamru? So I'll give you the most gewaldige perush of the Chatan Sofer. He says that to be Shomer Shabbat means to look forward to Shabbat. He says that you are a Shomer Shabbat from Sunday to Friday. And on Shabbat, you're an Oseh Shabbat. And where does he learn it from? Also our parsha this week. Joseph tells his dreams to his family. Vayekan uvo echad, the reaction of his brothers was, they were jealous of him, and his father, ve'aviv, shamar et hadavar. His father was shomer this matter. What does it mean he was shomer this matter? His father believed in it. His father looked forward one day to the fulfillment of these dreams. He stored it within his heart and his mind, anticipating that great moment. To be shomer, therefore, means to look forward to. Therefore, says the Chatan Sofer, to be shomer Shabbat, v'shamru, means let's look forward to Shabbos. Just like that fish in the waters of the river. We might have had hundreds of Shabboses in our lives before, but now that the next Shabbos is arriving, let's us poke our heads out to take in Shabbat as if we've never had a Shabbos experience before. And so too, with regard to Shmirat Mitzvot, the observance of all mitzvot, regardless of how many times we've done this mitzvah or the other, we should never allow the majestic and remarkably exciting qualities of mitzvot to leave us. And particularly today, when we are competing with the most sophisticated and advanced presentational capacity that is flooding us from left, right, and center, we within our Jewish world need to have a sophisticated approach to guarantee that the beauty and the majesty of our tradition will be appreciated by Jewish people in order that we will always be enthusiastic about mitzvot. So if you're just keeping mitzvot in a mechanical way, davening because that's what our parents used to do, keeping Shabbos because you're supposed to, that's not good enough. We have to be excited by it all, and we should be excited by it all, because today a Jewish Torah way of life is more relevant than it has ever been in the history of the world. And Shabbat is the finest example of this. You know, there are certain communities in the UK which are starting to declare a mobile-free day. They're asking their members to choose one day of the week in which they won't carry a mobile with them. But we've got that day already. It's called Shabbos. It's a day on which we can spiritually rest. We can recognize there's one true creator. It's the most remarkable phenomenon. We've got it all there in the heart of our family. So Baruch Hashem, we have everything to be enthusiastic about. And our fifth strategy is as follows. What's the difference between a dead fish and a live fish? You know, both a dead fish and a live fish can be sometimes visible on the surface of water. And it might be difficult to tell the difference. But I'll tell you one thing for sure. If you see a fish that is flowing with the current, maybe it's alive and maybe it's dead. If, however, you see a fish that is swimming against the current, then for sure it is alive. And that's what Yaakov was saying. Thank you very much. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'akol nהיה b'dvaro. So that's what Yaakov was saying to all future generations. As Jewish people, if you go with the flow, maybe your Yiddishkeit is intact, maybe it's not. But one thing's for certain. if you have the capacity where appropriate to swim against the current, to be different because you're Jewish, then your Yiddishkeit will be alive. And one of our greatest challenges is to determine when we go with the flow and when we show our difference. Different communities will have different responses to this. But if we totally lose the capacity of Havdalah to differentiate and to show that we have our own ways, then we will lose touch with our glorious and wonderful tradition and faith. Therefore, we need to be committed, where appropriate, to go against the flow, to show our difference with pride. So, ladies and gentlemen, those are the strategies that I suggest. Having the right mindset, to be positively minded, to appreciate the opportunities that we've got, and then to ensure that we have a natural love for our fellow Jews, to promote Jewish unity, to ensure that we are proud about our Judaism, and also that we're fully enthusiastic with regard to our Torah and its mitzvot, which will only take place if there is adequate and proper and solid education, coupled with an active and fruitful Jewish community life. Then we will too know when it is appropriate for us to be just like everybody else, and when we should, with pride, show our difference. But let us not forget the first of the 5 perushim, and that is we need siyata dishmaya, with all the strategies we might have. And may the Almighty bless all of us for a glorious and great future for Anglo Jewry, for Manchester and every other centre in this country. May Hashem be with us. Let's not just leave it up to Him. Let's not just pray to God. We ourselves have to try our best, for our sake, for our children's sake, and for our children's children's sake. And please God, we will succeed in guaranteeing a great, glorious, and wonderful Jewish future for us all. God bless you.